What I'd like to share with you all is application of the ISO 55000 principles and how we're applying those principles at the District of Columbia. I'm sharing my screen, so I hope everybody can see it. There's a lot of information. I am going to go pretty quick, and there's a lot to talk about. So we'll jump right on in. So this presentation I'm going to give on ISO 55000 is from the lens of capital budgeting. So I work within the capital budgeting department and I look at all the district's assets. So for us to apply the ISO 55000 principles, we can boil it down to four, and this is in terms of the capital budgeting, into four concepts for capital budgeting. One, what are the assets that we need to be maintained? Two, what is the quality of the assets that we have? Three, how will we prioritize our capital needs? And four, how much funding is available to address capital needs and asset maintenance? So for the first part, what assets do we have that need to be maintained? So we're a city, right? So this is a District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. We have over 300,000 assets, like a vehicle is one asset, a building is one asset. All of our agencies have their own internal data sources. What we've done is we've tied into those individual data sources and we consolidate that information into a data warehouse. And we do consume it through a data system that we call CARS, Capital Asset Replacement Scheduling System, but you do not need to have that to do what I'm about to show you. But you do need to understand the assets that you have. So what we've done is there's 13 different data sources maintained by the agencies. Like one does fleet, one does roads, one does like bike shares. One does the master address repository, like Office of Tax and Revenue, where they do all the buildings and land records. So we know what assets we have through data systems, and we're tied into the data systems. This is another way of looking at what assets that we need to maintain. So for us, we're tracking 316,000 assets. That's a total of $12 billion. What are the quality of my assets? That's the second item. What is the quality of the assets we have? This is an example of roads, the next two slides. So the district, it's kind of small. We have 1,166 miles of roads, and this is for the district. So we can, and we're broken up into wards over here in the district. So we know what roads are within what wards, but we can go even a little bit deeper. We put condition on our roads. So we know whether our roads are in excellent condition, good, fair, poor, or very poor. We can do this with fleet. We can do this with buildings. So we can do it with every asset that we own. So that's how we do the quality of our assets. So there's actually, for roads, PCI, pavement condition index. Every asset has a condition variable that you can track. This is another slide of what are the quality of my assets. This is fleet. For the district, we have 6,000 vehicles, like 90 ambulances, 28 pumper trucks, so on and so forth. We have a lot of vehicles. In this one slide right here, at the very bottom, circling with a mouse, I don't know if you can see or not, but we could tell how many assets are about to fail in terms of fleet. I have 1,661 assets that are about to fail, but I also have 1,429 assets that are in the green that are good. We know every asset all the way down to the VIN number, even the color of the vehicle. We know the amount of assets, and we know the quality of those assets. This is just another example of the quality of the assets. This is the fire department. Like there's the 98 ambulances, so on and so forth. And on the right-hand side, we track items on every vehicle, but this just happens to be the fire department. So we know how much maintenance we're putting in the vehicles. We know the average age, the average mileage. It's a lot of data points that we're pulling into a centralized system that we can use to track when they need to be replaced. Another example of assets, of the quality of my assets, this is the fleet. Again, red, yellow, orange, green. For green, I'm good, red, I'm bad, and the yellow and the orange are points in between. So the third point of the four key things that we do in the district, as far as the ISO 55000 principles, is how will we prioritize our capital needs? This is fun. The next 2 points are really interesting, I think. The prioritizing and ranking of capital projects, you're going to want to bring in people to make the system work. And the way we bring in people to make our system work is we bring in experts. So we have experts in land, in building, in fleet, in IT, in equipment, in art. And we formed sort of a board. And every year we do our capital budgets annually, and they're a rolling 6 years. Every year we sit down, we huddle around the table, and we prioritize our assets. We have to prioritize our assets because every agency, there's about 33 agencies that are participate in our capital process, and everybody wants everything. There's not enough money to go around. You're going to see that in some slides coming up. So we have to ranking from the top project all the way down to the bottom project. Like oftentimes the bottom project is a dog park. I don't know why. And the top project could be like building a school. So we prioritize our rankings, our projects. This next slide is how we prioritize. It's a two-part slide because it's just too big to fit onto one. But we can prioritize a roof repair on the same 100-point scale that we can prioritize like a dog park, or a fleet, or building a building. So we have a ranking system. This is what we sit down with those group of experts, and we go through every capital project and we prioritize them. This is a second part of that same page. So this is just one legal page. It's actually a pretty in-depth prioritization and scoring. This is something that you could develop in your own work environment. You do not need a system. This is done in Excel, and you can actually adopt this now. So this is these next two slides. I think these are really fun. The prioritization and ranking of capital projects is slide 1 of 2. This is fun because this sort of describes in a picture everyone's dilemma when it comes to everyone, meaning we're a city and other cities. Agencies are asking for a lot of money. Our agencies in every 6-year period typically ask around $12 billion, but we only have $8 billion in funding. So that means $4 billion of projects every year you have to say no. And so this is a great example of that. It might be hard to see. I don't know how small it is on your screen, but there's a thin little red line. Well, first of all, each of these bars is a year. So our budget that you're looking at is 2021 to 2026. We do a 6-year rolling budget. And there's a red line that sort of goes in the middle all the way across. That's our available funding. So you see projects above the available funding and projects below. It's just a visualization that there's more projects being requested than there is funding. And how do you solve for this? Well, I'm going to go to the next slide that shows this being solved. In this next slide on the very far right, it might be hard to see, but there's a column called excluded. Those are all the projects that we cannot do. So we cannot build a new jail. We cannot build a new hospital. There's a new bridge. There's a lot of projects that we could not do. We push them to the right, they're excluded. We're tracking them, and that's a whole other discussion, the cost of inaction. And that's a whole separate discussion to have. But all of the columns on the left, those are the projects that were approved. The funding line that was red and the other screen is now green. Every single one of the projects below this green line are getting approved. These are the highest ranking projects. Next slide, this is the same in the very bottom right, grand total blue. It says $4.257 billion. That's $4 billion of projects that we could not do. So I'm going to go back up a slide. All of these projects that the agencies requested, there's this big excluded column. And here's that big excluded column again. This slide is all about the exclusions. And I think this is something that's not getting enough attention, and people really need to track this, the cost of inaction. What is happening with the projects that I can't do? Everybody wants to know what I can do. Everybody wants a new school, a new recreation center. What about what you can't do? Well, we're tracking what you can't do. This is a $4.27 billion. And because of the way we build our projects, we know, and we're breaking these down into buckets. Like the 4.27 million is broken down by IT. So we can't afford 172 million of IT, equipment and regulatory, can't afford 78 million in equipment, fleet, 179 million in fleet, horizontal infrastructure, the roads, highways, bridges, There's 740 million that we can't afford. And facilities, where most of our work is, we can't afford 3 billion in facilities. So all good stuff, all worthwhile tracking. And the only way you can do it is by following these principles, and you're tracking every single asset all the way down to its smallest detail. And for us, the smallest detail is you have to be greater than $10,000. That's just our threshold. So that 4,257 million we track all the way through, and eventually, and hopefully we'll get that funded later on down the road. But that, again, that's a whole separate discussion. So I'm going to wrap this up with conclusion of what ISO 55000 has done for us. And I think the biggest thing that it has done, single E, is this third item. I'm moving my mouse on it, but you can't see it, but it says bond ratings upgraded across the board, including a AAA by Moody's. Moody's increased us from AA to AAA. We got an additional $200 million worth of borrowing power. That is a big deal. That is a huge win. Just by following these principles, it increased the borrowing power of the district. So big win just by following the principles. That's the end of my this presentation. So I hope it helped. Hope you learned something from it. And thank you very much for your time.